Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar Weekly discussion topic video. In this week's video, I'm going to talk about basically Iroh, his backstory, and basically why I feel that his backstory would be very suited to kind of telling as a comic series or something like that. Exploring what is so interesting about his backstory, why it would work as a kind of a full series in and of itself. And also why he is often brought up as like in answer to the question, you know, what would you have the next comic focused on if it could be anything? Why more often than not, you'll probably see Iroh's backstory brought up in that conversation. So let's just jump straight in. So straight away, Iroh is a fan favorite character. Almost everyone upon watching Avatar for the first time notes Iroh as a very interesting character, even from very early on. Episode 3 would, I think, be the big breakout kind of moment for Iroh, but then as the seasons go on, he just becomes more and more interesting as they touch on aspects of his backstory, the death of Liu Ten being this like key central point in his backstory that seems to have changed him very much as a character from the way he was before to the way we know him as now. And we know him as wise. He's a member of the Order of the White Lotus, and you know he's traveled the world. He knows a lot about most of the cultures, and has kind of adapted some elements of all of the nations and their styles of bending into his own firebending to make himself more or less one of the greatest firebenders we've ever seen in the series. So he is a, you know, thoughtful character. He's spiritual. That's another element of his character that's there. That's a kind of mystery about like what exactly did he do with spirituality, especially given the way his life as a physical being came to an end and how he exists now as a spirit in the spirit world, helping the Avatar Korra, as we see. But it seems like he's going to stay there for good, basically, to help the Avatar. So very interesting life, and like we have the end of his life story more or less. I'm sure there's one or two interesting notes as we kind of get towards the end of his life, but primarily I think it is more important to tell his early story to further inform him as a character because he is so interesting. So I actually want to open this up with this kind of idea that's always brought up with his backstory of, was Iroh bad, evil, or massively different than we know him as now prior to the death of Liu Ten? So everyone cites that scene where he sends the letter to Azula, Zuko, and Ursa, and he gives them the gift from Ba Sing Se as the siege is going on prior to the death of Liu Ten, and he's like, maybe you should come visit one day if I don't burn it to the ground first. And it's just like, okay, he's joking with them, but he's joking in a very kind of somewhat sinister way. That's he's saying like, oh, like it will break through and burn it to the ground. But the thing to keep in mind here is that a lot of Iroh's kind of goal, his goal in terms of taking Ba Sing Se at that point in time, and why he put so much effort into it, the 600-day siege, is because he tells us that he basically had a dream, a vision, that he saw himself taking Ba Sing Se. And we know that it was obviously a misinterpretation. He initially thought that, oh, I'm the prince of the Fire Nation, I have an army here, that's how I take Ba Sing Se, that's the only way it can happen. I take it for the Fire Nation, and that's what my destiny is meant to be. And it maybe links into some of the fact that he's spiritual, that he has this, kind of like Zuko. Obviously his arc very much involves kind of the interpretation of what his destiny is meant to be. Should he follow his own feelings, or should he follow basically the destiny that his father had set up for him? And I suppose it's somewhat similar for Iroh in that, like, I assume Azulon was kind of like, seems very proud of Iroh and his son and so on. So Azulon would be pushing Iroh to like, yeah, take over Ba Sing Se. It would be a great strike against the Earth Kingdom in the war, and it would really help make you like one of the greatest people in Fire Nation history. But we know that inevitably what it comes down to is that the interpretation of the dream that was correct is that it is him taking back Ba Sing Se from the Fire Nation, liberating it with the Order of the White Lotus for peace in the world as opposed to for the sake of the Fire Nation. So I think there is an extra kind of layer to his backstory there in terms of, like, was he full on bad? Like, I don't think he was ever Ozai level. I don't even think he was ever Sozin level. We don't know a ton about Azulon apart from the fact that he ordered the strikes against the south. So I don't think he was really ever that level of evil. But just the fact that he was, at some point in his life, very devoted to taking over Ba Sing Se because of some sort of a vision, highlights that he is changed because of what happened there. The death of his son, Liu Tan, is a very important moment in his life that did change him, but there are so many events in his life that relate to spiritual matters and kind of highlighting him as a character who isn't necessarily just evil and all about power, in that it seems that he had the title of Dragon of the West for at the time in that flashback prior to the death of Liu Tan. So we know that he kind of lied about it to everyone that he killed a dragon. But still, it highlights the fact that happened. He went to visit the Ancient Stone Warriors, was given the true meaning of firebending, and developed the dancing dragon technique. He has that ability of firebending. And he had that, it seems like, prior to the death of Liu Tan, so that's a title he had before that, because to me it wouldn't make sense that, like, after the death of Liu Tan, when he abandoned the siege and effectively, at least as far as Ozai is concerned, like, given that Ozai took over the throne fairly soon after this incident, he would never be respected as gaining the title of dragon after the fact, really. So to me, he was known as the Dragon of the West prior to that, which instantly says that, like, okay, so he met with the ancient Sun Warriors prior to that, and that doesn't really come across as, like, some sort of an evil thing to do. The same with the Order of the White Lotus, in that, like, I could get that forming after the death of Liu Tan, but it feels like an old enough organization that he was potentially part of that for a longer time. How exactly did that form? Like, I think the formation of the Order of White Lotus, and I suppose how he came to be involved in it, is a very important kind of part of it, in that, as far as we know, Iroh is basically the highest ranking member of that organization. So was he always into kind of, this kind of wisdom, kind of knowledge, kind of spirituality, balance approach, or what? The whole, he's always liked tea, even when he's in that kind of, like, we'll burn it to the ground mode, he's still drinking tea, as we see. He's still giving gifts to his niece and nephew. So he has a good relationship with Zuko at that point in time, and we always get that Ursa in The Search even mentions that Iroh was always one of the bright lights of her time being a member of the royal family. So that speaks to the fact that he, at least to Ursa, never came across as a really bad person like most of the Fire Nation military, like Azulon, like Ozai, or anything like that. So he to me, that says that he was maybe not exactly the person we know, but he wasn't that far away from it. So that, yes, the death of Liu Tan was important, but it wasn't this, like, complete 180-degree turn for Iroh. I really think that is the case. And I think part of it, the subtleties of this, is why telling a story in a comic format or whatever about the exact details of this would be so interesting, to learn more about who he was growing up. Another thing that we really need developed in the Avatar universe is Iroh's relationship with Ozai. They never talk on screen, and I think this is one of those things that people don't realize until you tell it to them, that Iroh and Ozai never meet, talk. They're barely ever in the same scene together. I think the only scene that they're ever really together in is the scene where Zuko's burned. Iroh is present at that Agni Kai, but he never interacts with Ozai. He is just there watching as Ozai does that to Zuko. Other than that, we don't really ever see kind of Ozai and Iroh. We never see them speak to each other. And so we don't really have an idea what their relationship is. Ozai is clearly jealous of the fact that Iroh has the throne, as we see. And from Ozai's dialogue, he clearly very much doesn't respect his brother for being the way he is. So Ozai's obviously the power-hungry one, who's always on about power and stuff like that, whereas it seems like Iroh was always more of a kind of thoughtful character who was more balanced, saw stuff in the culture of other nations, developed more use firebending more, less as a just power form of combat, but understood the true meaning of it and kind of developed other techniques like lightning redirection and stuff like that. And then I suppose there's the idea of like, Iroh technically would be the earliest lightning bender that we know of. I don't think he created lightning generation, but we never see like Sozin use lightning. Azulon, we don't really know either. So like there's the potential that the lightning generation was discovered somewhere in the royal family not too far in the past. And maybe Iroh learned it first and taught it to Ozai. Like, what was their relationship like as, brother? That's something that you could absolutely develop to further inform why Ozai was so quick to like, okay, Liu Ten's dead, let me have the throne. That to me would be very interesting to understand more of that dynamic, which is completely unexplored within the series, really, outside of some vague references to it. We know that Iroh traveled the world. He at the very least went to the water tribes to basically study them. So he's studied waterbenders and their form and adapted that to his own technique to use lightning redirection. That's how he developed that technique from waterbenders. He knows enough about the other nations that he obviously can tell Zuko in depth about the true way that these cultures are, as we see. Now, you could say that if he is part of the Order of White Lotus prior to all of this stuff happening, he's been a long-time member of that, even behind the scenes, that he potentially could have like learned some of this stuff from Pakku, from Bumi, people like that. So that's another kind of side to it as well with him. Now, if they are to tell this story, I do think that they should go in depth in terms of the death of Liu Ten. I think you should, within that story, characterize Liu Ten, establish the closeness between Iroh and Liu Ten, and at the very least allude to who Liu Ten's mother is. I don't... Ultimately, like, I'd like to see a full-on character made out of the mother and Iroh's wife or whatever that is. I think most people, just based on the fact that she's just absolutely not mentioned, would assume that she probably died giving birth to Liu Ten, just based on the fact of, like, that would explain why then the death of Liu Ten was so important to Iroh, in that it represented kind of not just the loss of his son, but in a way the fact that, like, Iroh's wife died giving birth to Liu Ten, so in a way there's like both of them kind of living on through Liu Ten, and that's why the death of Liu Ten impacted him so hard. Adding that extra layer to it, I think, would make his story all the more tragic and kind of so much more interesting as well, just to like finally get that extra addition to the family tree as well, who is the mother of Liu Ten. Definitely develop Liu Ten in terms of like, did he see things the same way as Iroh? Was he more of a kind of thoughtful character who like was more kind of spiritual, wanted to learn the true way of firebending, maybe didn't necessarily agree with the direction the Fire Nation was taking, somewhat like Iroh? And what exactly was Liu Ten doing when he was killed? Was he killed by earthbenders? Was there an accident? Was it maybe Iroh leading some sort of a battle and it went, he made a mistake and that led to the death of Liu Ten? Just the fact that he says, kind of like in the Tales of Bossing, say, I'm sorry I couldn't help you like the way I helped all of the other people I just helped moments ago, tells me that Liu Ten was somewhat like troubled, and like that maybe he was somewhat rebellious, or something was happening in Iroh's life and he wasn't as close to Liu Ten as he kind of could have been, and they happened to argue or something like that just prior to Liu Ten's death. Liu Ten led a kind of hasty attack, he died, and obviously you have that moment of like Iroh remembers his last meeting talking to Liu Ten as a kind of more of an angry moment between the two or something like that. There's a lot of interesting stuff to go into there, and that like I think when you really analyze this, there's a lot of little things there that you can connect it to, like the whole idea of like, I'm sorry I couldn't help you, and does that mean like in battle, like you were overwhelmed, I wasn't there to actually fight alongside you, or was it a kind of like you were troubled in your own way and that trouble led you to being killed, or what? what was Liu Ten's relationship like with Zuko? In that Liu Ten would have been older than Zuko. They basically established that Zuko seemed to be affected by the death of Liu Ten, so he's met him before. Maybe they were close. And clearly Iroh has to have a connection to Zuko prior to the death of Liu Ten, explaining why Iroh would then focus so much of his attention on Zuko after that point. So you have to kind of go into that as well, kind of showing that Iroh was kind of around a lot, kind of spending time with Zuko. So that seems interesting. And in the background, you could further develop like Iroh and Ursa's relationship, informing what is said about it in the search. That would be a nice thing to have to further show the nice side of Iroh when he was kind of younger. And then the spirit world stuff. I think this is probably one of the few things that people would say like absolutely probably happens after the death of Liu Ten. Just because it seems like, okay, like maybe he could have the whole true way of firebending, learning from the other nations bit down. Maybe the spirituality bit did come after Liu Ten's death. Maybe he tried to find some way to, get him back or see him again, and that involved becoming spiritual. The fact that he, as far as we know, went to the spirit world, that's the legend around him. That's why he can see spirits and that he's been there before and has a connection to the spirits. How exactly did that come about? Where did he get the information from about how to go into the spirit world, how to meditate in there? What happened in there? How did he get out? A lot of these questions, like given the struggles that we've seen some of our characters go through with regards to going into the spirit world, and the journey they went through there, like what spirits did he encounter? What did he learn? How did that change him? And why he's such a spiritual character now, to the point where in his later life he would choose to abandon his physical body and become a spirit. So clearly his previous time in there has to be very, very meaningful and important to him to justify why he would want to kind of not just die but live on and kind of exist in the spirit world. So a lot of really, really interesting things there. Like, there is enough content there that you still need to fill in about Iroh's past that you could absolutely get like a comic trilogy out of it. Like, could you imagine like in a couple of months we get the announcement of the next Avatar comic series, and they're like, okay, it's a little bit different, it's kind of more of a spin-off type thing, expanded universe Avatar. The name of the comic is Avatar: The Last Airbender, Iroh, and it's just a 3-part comic series focusing on Iroh's backstory. That's all it is. I think people would love that. In the same way that The Search has been the comic series that has got the most people excited for the Avatar comics and more people reading them to learn what happened to Zuko's mother. I think Iroh's backstory is something that really would get a lot of people invested. Maybe the people who weren't so happy with Korra and the direction it took. Just having like one of their favorite characters, Iroh, their past be explored in a meaningful way would be very impactful. So who knows if they'll ever approach doing it. But as far as we're aware, Dark Horse do know that it is one of the stories that we want. Because at New York Comic Con last year, at the end of that panel, the Nick representative, the Dark Horse representative, they went around the audience and basically asked everyone, for future Avatar comics, what sort of stories do you want to see? And one of the first things that anyone said on the microphone was Iroh's backstory. They also said a lot of stuff about basically characters' histories, whether that be ATLA crew members when they're older, having kids, and getting married and stuff like that, or characters' backstories. Everyone brought up basically that sort of stuff. People are interested in the direct continuation of ATLA and the comics going forward. But we also want to just get the larger scale gaps filled in. The interesting, unique aspects of characters' backstories filled in. That don't just think about the forward, also think about the backwards, that there is so much history still to be filled in that we have no idea. And Iroh's backstory is a big event that people are very, very interested in. They want to know about it, and it would make for an amazing story because they have presented enough about his backstory that you can discuss it, think about it. Like, we're approaching 20 minutes here in this video, and there's just so much to it. So I'm pretty much going to leave the video there. I definitely want the comments in the comments below to kind of continue this discussion. Like, what are your thoughts on the idea of Iroh's story? Do you think there is enough there in his backstory with what we know to make for like a really unique backstory style series focused on him? I think there is, as I've discussed here. And then I suppose the more detail focused stuff to discuss in the comments. How do you think all of this little bits that we know about him link together? Like, which events in his past happen before the death of Liu 10 and which happen after the death of Liu 10? What are your thoughts on stuff like his Iroh's relationship with Ozai and his relationship with Liu 10? Do you think there is a bigger story beyond just that his son fought in the Battle of Ba Sing Se and was killed? Is there like more of a tragic story behind that, relating to what Iroh actually says when he has that tribute to Liu 10? So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts were on the video. But yeah, other than that, that has been the video. Thanks for watching.